So I'll just give you a rundown on the company that I work for. The company I work for is called Ecosave, and we do a lot of cool stuff. We've done a lot of stuff with schools, so in about 150 schools across the country, mostly in New South Wales and Queensland. We've done a lot of solar installations, LED lighting upgrades. We also do improving the air conditioning systems and strategies to work out, well, essentially to reduce their energy costs and make energy more reliable on their site. With particular things that are closer to the Gippsland area, we've done, more recently, there was a government grant that was specifically looking at dairy farmers. And so we filled out applications and got dairy farmers grants for that particular area. We also did an energy audit at the wastewater treatment plant. So we're looking at the pumps and how to maximise energy efficiency and reduce costs, reduce greenhouse gases at that wastewater treatment plant. Another thing we've done was a Sydney Opera House energy audit, and that's a photo of the main hall there. So there's a lot that we do. This is only a snippet that I'll introduce you to. The team that I head up is called the advisory team. We largely do consulting services to commercial industry, although lots of it does cover industry and also agriculture as well. So my journey began, it's a funny one. I thought I'd start the day with a story. So, and the story is called The Day a Tapir Saved My Life. Okay, so this goes back to 2002, and it was in a place in Costa Rica. It was a place called Corcovado National Park. And this is me in the top left photo here. I decided to hike through the park, and it's stunning. You can see some of the photos. All these photos are from Corcovado National Park. And it was just a truly amazing place. You see lots of different animals, and you see some of the most stunning beaches you've ever seen. I hiked about 20 kilometres. I was just on my own. And when you arrive to a restaurant, they have these, in that top middle, you've got a whalebone. They have these whale vertebrae seats in there. And they have all these different museums where you can see the different animals, animal sort of skeletons and that. Then on the way home, I decided I want to hike and camp on one of these beaches that I saw. And it was similar to the one you see either on the top left or the bottom right. All those beaches looked a little bit like that. And I was camping there by myself, probably about 10 kilometres from the nearest person. And in the middle of the night, I heard no, I didn't hear anything. I woke up to this thing pressing against the tent. It was like, it was squashing my head. And I'm in 10 k's from nowhere in the middle of the Costa Rican jungle. And this animal's pushing against my head. And I woke up all startled, and then it started breaking sticks and kicking sand all over my tent. And I was frightened. I'm sitting in my my tent with a little pocket knife and thinking, if he gets close to me, I'll just poke him through the tent. And then I looked out the window, and when I pitched my tent, it was like this beach on the bottom right-hand side. It was calm. It was like a lake. But when I woke up, it was like the surf that you see in the bottom middle. It was this roaring, pounding surf. And this wave came up, and it picked up my tent and took my tent out to sea. And I'm in the tent, and I was able to get out of the tent, run back, pull everything back to the canopy edge, the edge of the jungle, and then jump back in the tent. And the next morning I looked around, and I saw all these footprints of a tapir. The next morning I got out really slowly out of my tent, and I saw all these footprints of a tapir, which is this animal in the top right-hand side. And essentially what that tapir did was it woke me up in a time that I would have just been asleep, and the wave would have swept me into the ocean while I was asleep in my tent, and I would have been disorientated and who knows what happened. I could have drowned in my tent in the water. So then after that, I decided that I would dedicate a kind of a life towards giving back to nature and sustainability. So that is the obscure story of where it all began for me. And yeah, and the day the tapir saved my life. Okay, so that done, my sustainability journey since then has taken me to Wilson's Promontory. So I was a park ranger down there. I worked and lived there for about 8 months, played footy for Foster, and I thought I'd throw these things in because it's a very Gippsland conference and you guys would know or love or hate the footy team Foster. It's taken me to Central Queensland, which is how I've kind of come to this symposium. I've also been to London, Vietnam. The bottom right-hand side is a photo of doing an energy audit at the Sydney Opera House. And during that time, I went to every single room in the Sydney Opera House. I've seen every room, and that was a really amazing experience for me. So the work that I've done has led me into not only following a passion that I wanted to do, but it's led me to really fascinating places and constantly traveling and seeing great things. Okay, so sustainability consulting. What does a sustainability consultant do? Essentially, my job is to help businesses reduce energy consumption. And by reducing energy consumption, we're also reducing carbon emissions. But if you say to businesses, we want to reduce carbon emissions, some will say yes, and some will say, well, business is about finance and it's not feasible to do that. So we need to put it in a manner that provides a healthy payback period where we say you'll receive, I think there's an example down the bottom of that slide. So if you install LED lighting, it'll pay itself off in 2.5 years. And then you make 40% on your investment as a result of buying LED lighting. And the savings are made in the reduced energy expenses. So when we look at energy, we're looking at gas, electricity, diesel. They're the main forms. And then they all form a carbon emissions standard. And we apply these to commercial buildings, schools, industry, agriculture, warehouses. The list of clients doesn't really have a boundary because anything that is in the built environment, particularly where man has formed their own creations, we can then improve the efficiency. Improve the efficiency of that particular operation, and save them money and reduce their carbon emissions. So what do we look at when we look at energy consumption? One of the things we look at is it's called electricity interval data, and what it tells us is it tells us when energy is being used, and you can plot this on your own home because every house in Victoria was upgraded with what's called an interval meter. So you can contact your electricity retailer or that you use in your own home, and you can plot the data and you can find out exactly when your home uses energy. So in this graph on the top right-hand side, you'll see that around sort of 6 a.m. to maybe 9 a.m., you'll see there's a little spike in the morning. So that's when obviously family are waking up, they have their breakfast, and then they get in their car, they go to work. And that's when it drops back down. And then about 4, 5 o'clock, let's say 3, 4 o'clock, it starts picking up again. Kids return home from school, mum and dad return home from work, and then they're watching TV, they're cooking dinner, and they're spending their evening at home inside. So the energy picks up in the morning, picks up again in the evening, and most of the power is shut down overnight. Some things, maybe the dishwasher and so on, are happening at night. So there's a lot that we can tell from an energy profile. If we look at the bottom graphs, we can see of a typical building, it will have most of the energy consumption during the middle of the daytime, when everyone has left the home and they're now in the office. An energy efficient building has a slightly lower curve. And then if you have solar, because solar is using energy, is generating energy during the day, the site actually just takes the energy generated from the solar directly. So you're not purchasing any electricity from the grid. And so your electricity, it's not the usage curve, but I suppose it's the purchased electricity curve, will have a big divot in it, like this third graph in there. And then again, if you move forward, energy efficiency, ideally you just sort of want more of a flat line curve where everything's just operating quite nicely. So the next slide, did I just jump a slide? No, I didn't. Okay. So the next slide looks at typical energy usage in dairy farms. So again, we've got the, oops, I just jumped a slide. Again, on the bottom left-hand side, you've got the consumption profile of a dairy farm. So that's the same graph when you're using energy during the day. And this particular one covers 3 days over January 14, 15, and 16. And so you've got the kilowatt hours. This is the consumption graph on the left-hand side, and then the time of day across the x-axis. So in the morning, you've got the morning milking, which will probably happen somewhere between 5:30, 7:30. I hope we've got a few dairy farmers in this conference. I'm sure some of them, some of you are. And then, so if you have 2 milking sessions a day, the other one being at sort of around 4:30, and that's what generates these spikes. So you can see the energy is quite regular through the day, and then it jumps up, and again, it drops off during the milking sessions. So the 3 main areas where energy is consumed in a dairy farm is in the hot water, is in sort of the the water heating systems, which typically uses about 27%, 26-7%. The refrigeration system in the vats, and that's probably the largest one at 37%, and milk harvesting, so the milking process is 19%. And the rest of those are quite small. But this was a study conducted in Western Victoria for herringbone dairy, but it was across largely the whole of Western Victoria because they had energy problems, and they were looking at ways to improve it and ways to distribute the energy use over the day. So common energy efficiency recommendations. So when we go to a site, we do look at various things. We look at renewable sources of energy. So solar PV is obviously a big one. If you've got roof space, you can really get a good return on your investment for installing solar PV, particularly if you use energy during the day, the middle of the day when the sun is shining. You can harvest that straight off the roof rather than purchasing energy through the grid. Other forms are the windmills. And this photo is a screenshot of the Tura wind farm, which I've been down there as well. LED lighting is obviously a very common one. It has a very fast payback, and it's almost a no-brainer these days to put LED lights in any sort of warehouse, office, or building that you're managing. Air conditioning systems. Air conditioning is actually the largest user in commercial buildings, and so there's lots of different ways in which you can reduce the use of air conditioning without compromising the comfort conditions of the people inside the building. And that's the key point, is as soon as you sort of disrupt the comfort conditions of the people, they start complaining that they're uncomfortable. They don't start saying congratulations to the company, you're doing such a good job on your energy efficiency program. They say, I'm boiling hot, this is ridiculous, I can't work, and they complain. So the key thing is to keep people comfortable and sort of to integrate changes that are almost unnoticeable to the staff on site. With refrigeration, you can change the set point. So rather than having a band, or even with the air conditioning systems, there's a band where the air conditioning sits. So tell you a little story about that. In the 1950s, there was about 4 Americans, and they got together and they said, okay, what is the most comfortable temperature in the office? And they all agreed that it was 22.5 degrees. And so 22.5 degrees has been the absolute standard. Doesn't matter what the temperature is outside. If it's 40 degrees outside, it's going to feel like a freezer in the office. And if it's minus something outside, then it's going to feel excessively hot. But we use a standard today on 22.5 degrees that was based on 4 guys in America just deciding when they're comfortable. And that was when the offices were heavily male dominated and there was very few females in the office as well. So there's a lot to adjust to the modern times, and these are things that we put forward to our clients to help them move forward in their program. So what causes carbon emissions? I'm sure you guys are pretty aware of this. It is the burning of fossil fuels, essentially. Burning of diesel, petrol, coal. Nuclear is a very clean form if we can contain it. There's natural gas, and obviously bushfires are a thing. It's not something that we intend to do, but they release a lot of carbon. So the electricity, so using electricity in the home, if you don't have solar, then you are purchasing it from the grid and you are essentially adding to the fossil fuels. So one of the great things that is happening at the moment is actually the pandemic, and having this lockdown situation is probably has been Mother Nature's best friend. I think the environment, if you walk out, you guys are probably mostly in the country, but in the city where I'm based, you can walk out, the air is cleaner, there is less noise pollution. It's actually just a beautiful time to soak up what is happening in the city. There's less air traffic as well. And I think this is a really nice break that Mother Nature is having on day-to-day living as we used to know it. So in a typical home, I've got a graph here on the right-hand side of where your energy is consumed in a typical home. So lots of it goes towards heating. That's also air conditioning rather. So heating and air conditioning, domestic hot water, refrigeration. Then there's home entertainment, lighting, cooking, dishwashers, etc. So in a sense of Australia is actually a horrible polluter in a per capita sense of greenhouse gas emissions, where I think this was taken in 2016, we're now the second worst. We were the worst at about 22.5 tonnes per person per year. And that has now dropped. And largely, we have a higher standard of living, and we also have this tyranny of distance where there's such large distances between places. So much goes towards, actually so much of the greenhouse gas goes towards mining, agriculture and transport. So this is the ABC of carbon cycle. So where does the carbon go? Okay, so if we burn fossil fuels from this house, it goes up into the sky, but then the plants the trees absorb carbon through photosynthesis, and then they bring it back down to the ground. There's a bird it's dead on the ground. It must have fallen out of the tree. It decomposes and gives off CO2. And then it also goes into the ground. The cows eat the grass, cow poos in the grass, and everything sort of circulates around this wonderful cycle. But we're playing a bit of ball with the cycle by burning more and cutting down less trees. So how do we look at the carbon footprint, or how do we, where is the carbon going? So when we look at food, particularly food, this is the carbon footprint of the food supply chain. So beef is really heavily carbon intensive. For about 1 kilo of meat, it's about 60 kilograms of carbon has been released. And then, which compared to chicken, that's about 10 times the amount. Chicken is about 6 kilos of carbon per kilogram of chicken. So this list will run you through it. Nuts even have a negative effect, as they you're planting trees in spaces where there would otherwise be just cleared land that was previously used for agriculture. Carbon emissions from your travel. So when you're traveling, you're using carbon emissions, whether that's by domestic flights or whether that's by planes, cars, buses, rail, and so on. Unless you're using a bicycle or walking, which is a great way to travel around, you're going to be generating carbon emissions. And looking at how these are done, or how these are calculated, you can then add these to your carbon footprint to determine what gets used. Carbon footprint in your food. Okay, so whatever you had for breakfast or lunch yesterday, you were eating carbon. No, you're eating food that had generated carbon to get to where you had it. So a breakfast sandwich containing egg, bacon, and sausage is probably like the beefiest sandwich you can have, and that was 1.4 kilos of carbon to create that sandwich. So, which is the same as driving a car for 12 miles. 12 miles is probably about 18, 19 kilometers. Okay, so what do we do with the carbon? So carbon sequestration, we can by planting more trees, we can store carbon, and we can offset the carbon that we're emitting by planting trees. Eucalyptus is particularly good. It's a very dense wood, it's fast growing, and it's long growing and it's got a long lifestyle. So, and they're just, I think eucalyptus trees are beautiful, particularly in the Gippsland region. You've got the Strzelecki Ranges, which has some of the tallest trees in the world, particularly they used to. And if anyone's been to Thorpdale, there's this sign that it was the world's tallest tree. And I drove there once. I saw the site of the world's tallest tree, and I was really excited to get there. And in the end, I got there, and it's just this big stump. And it's got that little plaque there, and says the world's tallest tree was cut down back in 1884. And it's like, oh, what a bummer. But anyway, there's some really great things that you can do, and some of the trees in South Gippsland are the largest. So the carbon in the trees, you can look at this is how to calculate how much carbon is stored. It's looking at the tree mass. 65% of the tree is solid mass, where 35% is water. So we take, this is a bit of chemistry, it's a bit of maths, but this is my job, I largely deal with numbers and turning energy into figures and making everything tangible. So it's a bit of a complicated formula, but if anyone's interested in looking at a tree and finding how much carbon is stored in that tree, I've given these slides to Amy, and she can pass them around onto the schools, or you can contact me directly and ask for a copy of my slides, that's fine. Okay, so how much carbon is in a tree? So if we look at a tree, this is the tree that I've got here, it's called a Corymbia citriodora, or a lemon-scented gum. Okay, in that picture, that is a tree that is typical and endemic to central Queensland. You can pick off the leaves and put it in your tea. It's really nice, but it's also the most planted eucalyptus species in Australia. So you'll see that one quite a lot. It's got a really nice smell. So for a 12-year-old lemon-scented gum weighing 600 kilograms, what's green? Oh, sorry. Then the amount sequestered by the entire tree is the 600 kilos times the weight of the tree without the water, times the 50% carbon factor, with that's the emission factor. So times the root volume as well. So your total tree has come up to be to have sequestered in its lifetime 859 kilograms of CO2, and over 12 years you can break that down to say 72, to make it easy, 72 kilograms of carbon per year. That's going to differ with each tree. Obviously, different conditions will make them grow faster, slower, but for the purpose of the next slide, we'll use those figures. So we're going to move on to the to your quiz. Is that right, Amy? How am I off for time?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. So okay. If everyone could get their booklets together and turn to page 10. On page 10, you'll see the table that Simon's got on his slide there. And have your pens at the ready because Simon's going to roll through some different formulas that you're going to need to quickly jot down.
Thanks, Amy.
Oh, yeah, actually, so we've got a question here, Simon. Could we quickly ask this one before we move on? Sure. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
So this one is from Mafra, and they were just wondering if a tree absorbs 72 kilograms of carbon a year, how much carbon does one person produce in a year?
Well, that's a good question. That comes down to generally where you live. So Australia has one person. I can go back to a previous slide. So how much? I'm still sharing my screen, aren't I?
Yes, we've got your screen.
Okay. So in this one, oops. Sorry. Okay. So on this screen, you can see this is the tonnes per person per year. So in global emissions per person, so Australia on the right-hand side generates about, each person generates 22, let's call it 22.5 tonnes per year of carbon emissions. So if one tree has 72 kilograms, so you need to do 22,500 divided by 72 is how many trees per year, I guess. So if you live to the age of 70, whatever, does anyone have a calculator in front of them? Could someone pull that up? Screen's up, but 22,500 divided by 72 will determine how many trees you would need to plant to offset your life. Because they say it's 70 years that a tree will last under the Kyoto Protocol. They say if you're planting to sequester carbon, that tree needs to be there for 70 years. Okay, so let's say a human lives 70 years, it's a little bit longer. But what was that result there, Amy?
I had 312.5.
Okay, so there's the answer. 312.5 trees you would need to plant in your lifetime to sequester the carbon you have generated as an Australian. That will change with each country. But yes, as an Australian, plant some trees. It'll offset your lifestyle. So, okay. And also on this graph, you can see the other countries that are really the high producers: Saudi Arabia, USA, Canada, Kazakhstan, Russia. All of those are really high oil-intensive countries. Yeah, it is where you've got energy, an abundance of energy, cheap, available energy. Then it becomes the incentive to reduce it is less because it doesn't pay itself off as quickly. So, yeah, all those countries are up the top there. Okay, so here we go. So what we'd like to do out of this, this little quiz that we've got now is to figure out how much energy you have saved, firstly as an individual, but then as a classroom, add all your numbers up and we can find out how much the Symposium has saved by having this as a virtual event. And Amy, you can get involved in this too because you would have taken flights, had accommodation and so on. So in the item column, we can just say, okay, we can relate this to travel, food, accommodation, and some of the other things. We can discuss those in the next slide. Then we can sort of work out the formula. So that is how far you've traveled and put the answers in. So I'll go to the next slide. Now you've got that book open in front of you. I'll put those things together. And let's assume that the symposium is a 2-day event, which it's been. And we're going to have it at the MCG because that's a place that everyone knows. So first you want to work out how far do you need to travel to get to the MCG. So wherever your school is, do you travel from home to your school in a car? Or do you go by bicycle? What's your mode of transport? So you might say, okay, the first leg of my journey is from home to school. And then you're going from school to the MCG. You can either choose to stay the night at the MCG for 27 kilograms per room per night, or which is down here. It's all on the slide. How are you going to get there? You can choose your method of transport. And then we need to add all of these figures up. So some of these are in grams. The accommodation is in kilograms. I've got some of the sandwiches. Listen, if you're going to have a salad sandwich, you can perhaps reduce those sandwiches by 500 grams and so on. So then we can pile all this up, get all this information together, and we can add the different schools. So once the classrooms work out each individual, we can put the schools together and determine how much energy has been used, how much carbon has been saved by having this as a virtual event.